Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old soldier who rose from relative obscurity to become the leader of Burkina Faso, has become one of the most watched figures in modern politics, not just in Africa, but across the entire world. And the question that keeps echoing from Ouagadougou to Washington is simple. Why is this young leader causing so much unease for the most powerful nation on earth, the United States of America? To understand the weight of this story, we have to go back to 2022, when Traoré, then only a captain in the army, grew frustrated with the corruption and failures of his country's leadership. Terrorist groups were spreading across Burkina Faso, villages were being attacked, thousands were dying, and the government seemed either powerless or unwilling to act. So in a bold move that shocked even his own comrades, Traoré led a coup, ousted the president, and claimed power, instantly becoming the youngest head of state in the world. But what makes this story different is not just the coup itself. Africa has seen many coups before, but the choices Traoré made afterwards, because instead of aligning himself with Western powers for protection and legitimacy, he went in the opposite direction, turning his back on France, the former colonial master, and refusing to bow to pressure from Washington. And that decision is what put him in the global spotlight. Within months, Traoré expelled French troops who had been stationed in Burkina Faso for years under the pretense of fighting terrorism. He ordered the shutdown of French state media like Radio France Internationale and France 24, and he spoke openly about the dangers of neocolonialism, using words that resonated deeply across Africa, because for decades, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had felt trapped in a cycle where their resources flowed outward to foreign nations, while poverty, instability, and corruption remained at home. And suddenly, here was a young man standing up and saying no more. Here was a leader willing to risk everything to break free. For the people, especially the youth, this was inspiring, and almost overnight, Ibrahim Traoré's name began spreading across Africa like wildfire, his speeches going viral, his simple military attire becoming a symbol of defiance, and his refusal to bend to France or the US, turning him into something larger than a politician. He became a symbol of resistance. But with that symbol came danger. Washington, which has long seen Africa as both a source of critical resources and a strategic battleground, could not ignore what was happening in Burkina Faso, because beneath the headlines of coups and protests lies a much bigger story about power and influence, about who controls Africa's gold, uranium, and rare minerals, about who gains access to military bases and intelligence networks, and about who writes the future of the continent. The U.S. has invested heavily in Africa through AFRICOM, its military command, establishing drone bases, training local forces, and creating a network of influence designed to protect American interests and limit the spread of rivals like Russia and China. But Ibrahim Traoré, as sudden rejection of the West and embrace of alternative allies, threatened to unravel that strategy. Because if one young captain could successfully defy France and ignore Washington, then what would stop others? And indeed, others were already moving in the same direction. Mali, Niger, and Guinea had also pushed back against Western dominance, forming new alliances with each other and leaning toward Moscow and Beijing, and together they created what is now known as the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional bloc that openly defies the old order. And at the heart of this shift stands Traoré. This is where the suspense deepens, because history has shown that when African leaders dare to step outside the lines drawn by Western powers, the consequences are often dire. Patrice Lumumba, Congo's first prime minister, spoke of true independence and control over resources, and within months he was assassinated in a plot tied to the CIA. Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso in the 1980s, spoke of self-reliance, anti-imperialism, and dignity, only to be betrayed and killed in a coup supported by outside forces. Muammar Gaddafi, who dreamed of a united Africa with its own currency and military, was bombed and killed after NATO intervened in Libya. These are not coincidences, they are patterns, and every African who knows this history is now looking at Traoré and asking, will he be the next target? The United States, for its part, remains cautious in its public statements, often framing its concern in terms of democracy, stability, and counter-terrorism, but behind closed doors, analysts and officials understand the real issue. If countries like Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali turn away from Washington and Paris and toward Moscow and Beijing, then the West loses not only its access to vital resources, but also its geopolitical influence across an entire region, and that is something the US cannot accept easily. Uranium from Niger fuels nuclear power, gold from Burkina Faso feeds global markets, rare minerals from across Africa are essential for electronics, batteries, and modern technology, and if these fall under Russian or Chinese influence, then Washington faces a dangerous disadvantage. Not just in Africa, but on the global stage. And so the question becomes, how far is the US willing to go to stop this? Already, there are whispers of covert plans, of economic pressure, of sanctions and intelligence operations designed to destabilize regimes that refuse to comply. And every time Traoré gives a speech about sovereignty, every time he stands next to Russian officials or Chinese delegations, those whispers grow louder. But what makes this story so gripping is not just the geopolitics. It is the human element, because Ibrahim Traoré himself is unlike many leaders Africa has seen before. He doesn't live in luxury palaces or wear expensive suits. He appears in plain military fatigues, often speaking directly to crowds without notes, without polished speeches, but with raw emotion that resonates deeply with ordinary people. And in a continent where so many leaders are seen as corrupt or distant, this makes him stand out even more. Young Africans see him as one of their own, someone who understands their struggles, someone who is willing to risk his life for change. And this popularity is precisely what makes him dangerous to Washington. A leader who commands not just power, but genuine love from the people is harder to isolate, harder to bribe, harder to control, and harder to overthrow without sparking massive backlash. And this is why many in the US foreign policy circles fear Traoré's rise, because he is not just leading a government, he is fueling a movement. And yet, with every movement comes risk. Traoré himself has admitted in interviews that he faces threats to his life, that there are forces trying to destabilize his government, that assassinations and coups are real possibilities. And he has said openly that he would rather die than serve foreign interests, words that sound heroic, but also tragic, because they echo the last words of Sankara, of Lumumba, of Gaddafi. Each of those men believed they were building a new Africa, and each of them was silenced before their dream could be realized. So the suspense around Traoré is not just about what he is doing now, but about what might happen next. Will he be able to hold on to power long enough to change the trajectory of Burkina Faso? Will his alliances with Russia and China protect him from Western interference, or will they put an even bigger target on his back? Will the alliance of Sahel states grow stronger and inspire other African nations, or will it collapse under pressure from powerful enemies? These questions are what keep this story alive, what make it more than just politics. It is history unfolding in real time, and every decision Traoré makes could tip the balance one way or the other. For now, Ibrahim Traoré remains in power, still young, still bold, still defiant, and his vision for Africa continues to resonate, but the storm around him is building, and the world is watching closely. The United States sees him as a threat to its dominance. Russia and China see him as an ally in their fight for influence. And Africans see him as a symbol of hope. And somewhere in between all these competing forces lies the fate of a nation, and perhaps the continent itself. Will Traoré become a legend, remembered as the man who stood up against the greatest powers and survived? Or will he join the tragic list of African leaders who dreamed too big and were cut down too soon? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. This young captain from Burkina Faso has shaken the world in ways few could have imagined. And the story of Ibrahim Traoré is only just beginning.